Hello, everyone. Welcome from wherever you are and whenever you are. It is such a delight to be here today and to be here today with very, very special individual, Professor Brian Little. I'm going to say a few words about Professor Little before we invite him on stage, so to speak. The way it will work after the introduction, I will chat with Professor Little for about 25 minutes or so, 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for your questions about anything regarding happiness, personality psychology, and everything in between. So, this could be a formal introduction where I introduce you to the great work that Professor Little has conducted, to his potentially life-changing book, Me, Myself, and Us, which I cannot recommend enough, to the fact that he teaches a very important course at University of Cambridge Business School, Personality and Wellbeing, that he's a world-leading expert in personality and well-being. But I want to begin by sharing a personal story, rather than talking about the credentials and all the accolades and the amazing work that he has done. So Professor Little and I met 22 years ago, or 23 years ago. And at that time, I was a graduate student, and I was a candidate to be a TA, teaching assistant in Professor Little's class. And we met, and for me, it was love at first sight. I don't know about him. We haven't spoken about that first date yet. I really wanted to teach with him, and I taught, and the class was amazing, and I learned so much about personality psychology. And then the following year, actually, Professor Little taught the same class again, and I wanted to teach, but I was strongly advised in no uncertain terms by the chair of the department, by the professors that are around me, not to teach. They said, look, you're teaching way too much for a graduate student. What you need to do is buckle down on your research. Now, by that time, I was also doing research under the guidance of Professor Little, so it's not that I would not have my Professor Little time. However, despite the recommendation of the higher-ups in the department, I decided to teach again. And the reason was not as much to learn about personality psychology, because I had learned the previous semester, I'd taken copious notes, I ran the sections, so I knew the material pretty well. But my goal, the second time round, was to take a class on teaching. Because Professor Little, beyond being an extraordinary thinker, researcher, is an extraordinary teacher. And I did TA that second class. And this time I had a second notebook, and I actually took notes on how to teach. So for me, that class the first class was life-changing in terms of the information that I received, and a lot of the things that we'll talk about today, I teach in my classes. The second class, still till today, affects the way I teach, the way I see the role of a teacher, of a mentor. So I'm so honored and grateful to be sharing the stage with my role model and my teacher, Professor Brian Little, who's muted. No,
now he's
yes.
Unmuted. And just so touched by that recollection, Tal. It was transformative for me too when I first met you. And I I remember thinking, my gosh, if this is the caliber of the mind and personal style of the people I'm going to be working with, I'm going to be happy here for a few years. So it worked out very well, and I'm just so delighted to see how flourishing your initiatives have been. And you introduced me, recruited to my lab, Adam Grant, for which I am very, very grateful. At one point, we were in our personality class, we had Tal and Adam Grant and Sean Aker. It was quite a remarkable bunch of people who ended up transforming the field of positive psychology. At the time, I refused, as you may remember, to acknowledge that I was personality, that I was a positive psychologist. So I think I was more like a neutron psychologist. As a personality psychologist, I looked at both the flourishing and the floundering aspects of individuals, and consequently, I thought that we were able to subsume the positive psychology. But since I'm now regarded as a positive psychologist, and I will admit to that. But there's enough of a difference, which we'll get into today, that will make me continue to spar with you as we sparred right from for the listeners. Tal often talks about beautiful enemies. We disagreed, particularly on self-esteem, about the merits of the concept. And he was a major proponent and an articulate proponent of self-esteem theory. And I felt that self-esteem was not estimable, and that it could get us into some difficulties if we followed the enhancement of self-esteem to its logical destination. And Tal fought me, but he fought in such a sweet way that I ended up learning a great deal from him. And I continue to be a student of both personality and positive psychology, and Tal has been one of my teachers.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And, you were mentioning how it was important for you to expand the notion and not just look at positive psychology, but look at the and. In other words, look at flourishing and floundering. And that, as a result of our many conversations around this idea, has become a central pillar of our teachings, whether it's the certificate program, whether it's the master's program. We talk about how we need to look at reality. And in reality, we sometimes flourish, we sometimes flounder. And it's important to not just acknowledge both, to understand both,
yes,
and deal with both.
Yes.
So this is something that you talk about a lot, and you're one of the few people in the world to really bridge initially the world of personality and social psychology, which is what you brought to Harvard then. But today you're bridging personality psychology and well-being.
Yes.
So what is, first of all, personality psychology, and why is it so important for the pursuit of happiness?
Yeah, it's a great starting point. Personality psychology is a discipline that takes as one of its founding precepts that each of us, each of the listeners today, is in certain respects like all other people, like some other people, and like no other person. And in the like all other people, we join forces with people in evolutionary psychology and developmental psychology, look at what is common about the human condition, irrespective of all these individual differences. And personality psych has some contribution to make to that. But it's particularly in the how we are like some other people and no other person that personality psychology has a distinctive focus. And under the rubric of how are we psychologically like some other people, there falls out probably the most dominant perspective in personality psychology for the last couple of decades, which is trait psychology. And I'll get into that in a second. But underneath that, or on top of it, depending on your perspective, is the whole question of what is distinctive about George or Allison. What are the peculiar distinctive features that are truly Georgian or Allisonian that make you stand apart? And I think that unless we know the links between the way we're like other people and the way we're unique, we're going to miss out on the core of happiness. And we have I've developed over the decades a framework. The technical name is a social ecological framework in which human flourishing is what we're eventually trying to concern ourselves with, which would subsume well-being, would subsume such things as happiness in different domains, life satisfaction, physical health, many of the attributes that you get into in your SPIRE model, for example. We subsume under that concept of human flourishing. Mm-hmm. But we want to know what are the features that may influence the likelihood of flourishing rising or being compromised. And here we have two things. I'll be a professor and create a block diagram. So here's flourishing over here. Up here is the personality traits, the way that you're like some other people. And here is the context of our lives. What kind of country do you live in? What kind of world are you inhabiting right now? And that also, if I can draw an imaginary arrow, that also influences our flourishing. So traits influence flourishing, our context influence flourishing. And right in the middle, around my nose, are our personal projects in our lives, what we do in our daily lives, or think we ought to do, or think we want to do, and do or don't. Those considerations are also critically important. And I'm going to be very keen to tell you why I think they're important later in the interview. But that's a 30,000-foot overview of what I'm doing.
So we have the context at the bottom here. We have, our traits that we share with some people, not with others. And then we have the personal projects, which are unique to us.
They are common in the sense that many of us have life tasks, such as getting married, or these are age-graded life tasks, so that at different stages of the life cycle, there are social pressures to pursue various projects, which could be looked at as sort of tasks. But there are also projects that more reflect the idiosyncratic proclivities, preferences, values of the person. And sometimes those can be in conflict. So the life task that the context provides you may lead to a personal project you don't really truly enjoy and value. You don't want to get married. You don't want to have kids. You want to commit yourself to another major project or pursuit that puts you in antagonistic relation to those who are trying to shape your life. These are the dances that occur when we're in the real world of people pursuing projects and meeting the demands of the context or the contextual features of our lives, while also trying to satisfy our own needs. So this is where things get complex and human.
Or maybe they get human and therefore complex.
Exactly.
So
we're not simple creatures.
No, we're not. So, but let's break down this model. The three antecedents of flourishing.
Yes.
So again, the traits, the context, the personal projects.
Yep.
With each one of them, what can I do? If I'm not a trained personality psychologist, I'm here listening to this conversation. What can I do in my life to increase the likelihood that I will flourish?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to start with a proposition that I'm going to later question and qualify. But I think it's important to make it. There was a summary article of some of the research done on traits, as you know very well, a couple of decades ago, which concluded that happiness is being a stable extrovert. And the traits, for your listeners who aren't familiar, there are what are known as the big 5 traits of personality. They spell out an acronym, which is OCEAN. And 2 of those are extroversion and neuroticism, a term I don't like very much, but the opposite of that is stability. And I'll go through the others in a minute, but happiness is a stable, that is a non-neurotic extrovert. And when people, and you can assess yourself on these big 5 inventories, there's another set of assessment tools that Adam Grant, one of our friends, and Ray Dalio initiated this. It's called Principles U, Y-O-U. And you can assess yourself on traits that are very similar to the big 5. They subsume the big 5. So there are 12 of these traits and their underlying facets. So it's easy for you to get access to these. Those are free, incidentally. You don't need to pay for that. And you can get a sense of where you stand relative to other people. This is how you're like some other people. And are you an extroverted person? And are you a composed individual, or do you tend to be a little bit ruffled in your daily life? And if we just took that away, boy, you're an unstable introvert, therefore you're not likely to be happy. That would be, first of all, it would be extraordinarily naive, and it would also be fundamentally misleading. We are so much more than our basic traits. However, it's like being at the top of a ski hill tall. It's like if you start off, the traits will sort of cut out a path for you. And unless you jump out of that path, you're going to go down one that's predetermined. But it's not predetermined. You can change path. You can jump your skis over to another trajectory. And that's where personal projects come in. And so the way I phrase it is that, yeah, there are traits that influence the likelihood, other things being equal, that you will experience happiness in your life and flourish in various domains. But fates, traits are not fates, that they are our trajectory of our lives are such that we can find ways of massaging our traits, of dealing with them, of engaging in patterns that allow us not to be overcome by their distractive nature, but to actually grow from the fact that they are pointing us in a direction that may lead us to a lack of happiness. In that respect, traits begins a conversation, but it doesn't end the conversation. And having traits that are apparently negatively linked to happiness doesn't mean we are doomed to be unhappy. It means that we can take action that are anti-fragile, in one of your favorite terms. That's where things get really, really interesting. But if I could just outline the big 5, would that make sense?
Yes, please.
People love to hear about the big 5. You know what worries me, Tal? Once I give them, and then I get deeper into personal projects, and questions are asked. people say, well, I think I'm an extrovert and my husband's an introvert. And I want to say, no. I said that they don't determine your fates, but people love to know about human personality traits. And as a personality psychologist, I want to say that's just the beginning of the story. And so wait for the ending. But we'll see. We'll see how many of the viewers ask questions about why their husband is so introverted.
And Brian, if I can just take a step back, in the conversation around happiness, there's a similar approach to genes or genetic predisposition. Where people say, well, she was just born with, happy genes, or, I was born with, anxious genes. And that's the end of the story, as opposed to this being the beginning of the story. So in this, there's a great deal of similarity.
And if we could visit these boxes again, I talked about person here and context down here. There are arrows between there because the genetic predisposition to sadness, let us say, is co-determined by the context. And so even intrauterine, you're going to find that the expression of genes depends upon a particular kind of context. And so I think you're absolutely right to raise this as a parallel concern that people have. Do I have the gene for happiness? I don't. My life is ruined. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. But if we could just take the big five, openness to experience is related to the what we call outcome measures, or let's now call them the flourishing aspects of success in creative fields. Conscientiousness, getting things done and getting them done on time, is related also to success in school and in organizations, except this is more conventional problem solving, solving problems that have a correct answer, in contrast to the open to experience, which solve problems that have yet to be fully articulated. So they both link to flourishing, but in slightly different subtle ways. E for extroversion. Extroverts are primarily motivated to seek out reward in their environments. And consequently, they literally have thresholds that make them discern that something good is happening, something positive is happening. Introverted individuals, particularly those who are anxious or not, we call them neurotic individuals. Neurotic introverts are particularly likely to be alert to punishment cues in the environment. Now, if you look at it evolutionarily, thank goodness we had both. Could you imagine how we would have survived as a species if all we saw were the rewards? We'd look out and all we would see would be prey. Now, with those who are more anxious and introverted, you actually see things, I don't know, let's call them predators. Could eat us. And so thank goodness these different aspects of orienting to the environment co-developed, and thank goodness we've got these differences between individuals, the way you're like some other individuals. It does mean that there's antagonism between them. Charlie is always seeing the positive things. That's why we call him Charlie or Chuckles or Chuck. But that's just one way of seeing the world. And just the other couple, A of ocean is agreeableness. And highly agreeable people flourish, particularly in groups, because they love groups to proceed effectively and without too much conflict. And people like to have agreeable people there. They're nice people. Those who are disagreeable are, I'm thinking now of your physical health aspect of SPIRE. They're more likely to experience cardiovascular problems and so on. It's the angry, hostile aspect of disagreeableness that is not conducive to well-being. And finally, neuroticism and the ocean, the N of ocean. I don't like neuroticism. I think the term is prejudging. I prefer the term oversensitivity or even sensitivity, so that somebody who is highly sensitive could be seen as neurotic if in fact that does not seem to jibe with reality. But boy, is it ever important that we have people in our lives who are able to discern subtle threats, nuances. They're like canaries in mines. And we need to have people like that. So again, may 1,000 personalities bloom, but we're just talking about 5 dimensions, and in the Principles U stuff, maybe 8 dimensions of personality. We're more than that. We're the projects we engage in, and now I'm going to say something technical, and that is that there's a growing piece of evidence. It's not enough for me to be certain about it, but there's growing evidence that the impact of traits up here on flourishing is mediated by the personal projects we engage in. So that if you take the fact that extroverts spend a lot of time with other people, that agreeable people spend a lot of time complimenting and being grateful for other people, their flourishing is not going to rise unless they're engaged in those activities, which they have a natural preponderance of, a natural disposition to do. So that's a technical issue, but to me, scientifically, it's a really important issue.
And it's a very important issue for well-being. So one of the ideas that you have been exploring and teaching is adding to the notion of well-being the notion of well-doing.
Yes.
And this has a lot to do with personal projects. Now, just on a personal level, I remember when I heard of personal project, that was life-changing for me in terms of being a researcher.
Yes.
Because I was no longer asking, so has this person got high self-esteem or low self-esteem, but rather when this person is with his close friends, you know, what's going on when it comes, or when this person is doing her research, how is her self-esteem? Looking at personal projects and how we respond.
Yes.
Do we flourish or not?
Yes.
In that space, personal projects that brings together the environment, that brings together the traits. So more on well-doing.
Yeah, you were one of the first to see that, incidentally, and I love the way it's sort of come into clarity in some of your own writing. Well-doing is an old term that was very popular in the 16th century. And I tried to resurrect it, as it were. It has biblical roots, so I'm using the term sort of maybe unduly loosely. But it had 2 meanings. One was doing good, so engaging in acts that are going to get you to heaven. We tend not to use it that way in our own research. I think of it as felicitous action. So felicity can mean good, in my judgment, for you and good for other people. And so it's action that is good. It may bring you into progress in the projects that matter to you, but at the same time, it captures an aspect of human charity, of giving, that I think was in the early days of research on goals and so on, seemed to be missing. So well-doing also gets away, and this is where you and I may disagree on this, I'm not sure, be fun to see. I think that when we talk about well-being, we often run the risk of just focusing upon subjective well-being, without getting into the impact that your acts have on loved others, on the environment. And I know that over the last 20 years, you've been learning something, because I see in your course that you look at sustainability of the environment and so on. Well-doing is looking at the projects that engage you and also do not conspire to interfere with those of others, and indeed may inspire others to grow and experience happiness and well-being.
So there's potentially a self-reinforcing loop between the two, because we also know, there's a lot of research on kindness and generosity and giving, and we know that when we help others, we help ourselves.
Yep.
And when we help ourselves, or when we increase our well-being, we're more likely to engage in well-doing.
Exactly.
So there could be a self-reinforcing loop between, my well-being and well-doing, which looks at others, that contributes to my well-being, and therefore I would want to contribute more to others.
Exactly.
Through well-doing.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I love
and
that.
One of the things about projects is that there are 5 major dimensions about personal projects. One is, how meaningful are your pursuits? How manageable are your pursuits? You may have projects that are suffused with meaning, but your life's in chaos. You can't do anything because everything is conflicting and you don't have time. And yet those pursuits, those projects really matter to you.
Actually, quite interesting.
I'm sorry?
No, someone.
Oh, okay.
But she said it's interesting, so that's good.
Oh,
could have been worse.
yeah, it could have been, what a load of crap. Thank goodness. Yeah. So meaningful, manageable, connected is another aspect of projects that we assess in personal projects analysis. How do we do it? We ask people to list their personal projects and then to rate them on various dimensions, such as enjoyment, consistency with your values, other people's view of their importance, how visible are they to other individuals, how stressful are they, how much love do you experience when you're pursuing them, how much guilt. We have about 17 to 20 different dimensions that we explore, and they sort of form these 5 factors. So meaning, manageability, connection with others, which includes support you receive and support that you give to the projects. Positive affect or emotion, and negative affect and emotion. And with negative affect, we don't subscribe to the view that you've got to pursue only projects that bring you positive emotion. There's an optimal level of the ratio between positive and negative emotion. Projects that are just fun, enjoyable, a blast, you may compromise meaning on those. At some point, they go stale. And when a project goes stale, we need to reconstrue them. And sometimes the reconstruing may lead us to believe that we're feeling a challenge, and that we're going to not be the beneficiary of that challenge. But what the anti-fragile notion conveys is that a project that has increased in meaning because it becomes more challenging and even more difficult and perhaps stressful can increase your ability to cope with those kinds of mandatory projects that life coughs up. The project that is initiated by a lump that you feel on your breast on a Thursday morning. The project that is occurring as you realize that your mom is losing her capacity to recognize who you are. And if you haven't had projects that have made you feel some pain and hurt, and you've recovered from them, you'll be much better off if you have had those than if you've just been playing for a lot of your life. And I think these are some of the truths that you capture, Tal, so well in your overall view of the broader picture of happiness. It's not just smiley face. It never was for you. It's way beyond that.
Wow. Thank you for that, Brian. We're going to open it up for questions, and the way it's going to work is as follows. If you have a question, you put your hand up by going down to reactions and clicking on the yellow hand, and we will start with Miriam.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing us to share time with you. I am a physician, an academic physician, and as many of you may know, these last couple of years were very difficult for anybody in the healthcare system with what happened with COVID and this secondary stress that we have to confront. Is there anything that you will recommend to people that works, like in my case, serving others? I saw, again, in my role as an academic physician, I saw a lot of suffering beyond the COVID per se, but families broken, kids being very afraid of their parents dying. And it's kind of hard right now, and has been kind of my goal during this time to try to bring a little of well-being and happiness and peace of mind to my students, my residents, and my colleagues. I want to share to show you more or less the magnitude of the problem. We have 300 to 400 of physicians dying by suicide every year in the US. And this started even before COVID, so the numbers probably are worse now. And more than 50% of burnout, the numbers of depression are above the 30%. And in a 1,200 people survey recently, 13% of physicians have thoughts about suicide, and 1% had an attempt during the last 12 months. I will appreciate if you can educate me, help me, because this is something that I believe is important right now.
Miriam, it's very poignant, your dilemma, and I see it in the physicians that I've worked with. These are extraordinarily trying times for healthcare professionals. And as you point out, they were burned out before COVID, many of them. I'm actually working with a group of physicians right now who are interested in precisely these questions, and with what is the link between the projects you're pursuing, the traits you have, and well-being. And I need to introduce two new terms here. One is what I call free traits, and the other is what I call the restorative niche. And a free trait is where you have a biological disposition, and as a physician, you'll know that there are certain what I call biogenic tendencies. Early on, you see this with temperament in young children. And you may have a biogenic tendency to be attracted to stimulation. You want stimulation. You love stimulation. We call you an extrovert. You also happen to be very agreeable. And so you are attracted to helping professions. You like excitement. In fact, you chose to be an ER physician. And everything has been great for you so far. You're bright. But things have started to really hurt for you because you're overloaded. You have a colleague who's very biogenically introverted, and she has a disposition that led her in a slightly different path into medicine, but has led her to be even more overwhelmed because she finds it hard to stand up to people. She finds it hard to say, we need more nurses or we're not going to be able to do our job. Now, what do these dilemmas pose for you from the perspective I'm having? Let's take the introverted, somewhat anxious physician who needs to stand up for her team. She may have to act out of character. She may have to act as a rather demanding, extroverted person to say, look at me. You're not looking at me. If we don't have more nurses, not only will I not be able to do my job, I'm out of here. I came here to help people, not to see them suffer. It's breaking my heart. Now, if you are an introvert, that has been enacting a free trait of extroverted assertiveness. Can you handle that? Yeah. Why? Because it advances a core project. So a free trait is an enactment that advances a core project that runs against your natural disposition. Can you do that? Yes, you can. What's it called? It's called professionalism, and it's also called love. You sometimes just act out of character because you adore the person you're engaged with. You act out of character because lecturing to students or helping individuals who are hurting is at your very core of your being. Does it cost you anything? Yes, it can. A naturally disagreeable extrovert can shout for her team to get more assistance. But one who is disposed to being pleasant, nice, conciliatory isn't going to find that easy. So what does she need to do? What does he need to do? As individuals who have acted out of character to advance a core project in their life, they need what I call a restorative niche. And that restorative niche can be something as simple as legitimate time out, time away, a room in the hospital, a weekend that you actually do take off, and maybe even a sabbatical where you restore yourself sufficient to come back and love well again. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but those are my initial thoughts about the dilemmas you face. And thank you for doing what you do.
So to create those restorative niches is so critical for sustaining the meaningful work of the service providers.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Luciana, can you please unmute yourself?
Hi, Doctor. Thank you for all your kind and savvy words. I have a question that has to do with the kind of people I'm working with in Spain. I normally work with civil servants, and they tend to have been in their job for more than 20 years. And yes, they have, I think they have fell out of love with their tasks. And I don't know necessarily where I could start off with working with the different kind of personalities, an introvert versus an extrovert that you were mentioning, so that together they're able to work again as teams.
Right. So what role are you playing with them? Are you a trainer or are you a manager or?
I'm a trainer. I'm a consultant here.
Gotcha.
In the south of Spain for organizational wellness. And so I go in to train them so that their workflows are more in harmony.
Right. What we've been finding in the work that we've been doing with the principals group, we looks at various personality traits and provides information on how you can share your own personality dimensions with others in the team. And I have to say, at first, I was a little skeptical about this because I didn't think people would want to share. But they do. And they are quite, there may be exceptions, but we've found very few exceptions to this, that if you adopt an atmosphere of openness and trust, you would find out, for example, from me, that I'm extremely introverted, that I'm quite conscientious, that I'm terribly positive in my interactions with others. That's not extroversion. I'm just highly agreeable to a fault. I'm not sad to share that. It doesn't bother me to share that information, but it sure makes interacting with me a lot easier than if people thought I was an extrovert, or if people thought that I'm comfortable when conflict is raised. I'm not. And so just having a mechanism, and by going into Principles U, which is, as I say, free on the web, and you can access it, you are able to share your results with family members, with people from other parts of your department, from your team at work that will help you in that respect. And now we're working on augmenting that with looking at the personal projects you share, because once we take a look at how you can shape your project system, knowing what your core projects are is really, really important. So I'm not interested so much in finding out who are you, what are your traits, as what are your core projects, what really matters to you. And a core project is a kind of personal project that has a number of features. One is it's very closely linked to your values. And if you ask people what their values are, sometimes they're a little vague. But if you ask what a core project is, what's something that you're doing or thinking of doing in your life that really matters to you, they have no trouble with that at all. And what we find in our research is that these are closely linked to your values. They are things without which, as one of the philosophers, Bernard Williams, says, you may even question whether to get up in the morning. And they're projects that are so tightly linked to the other projects in your system that if you take it away, everything collapses. Now, if I know that about you, if I know about David, that he has as his core project his son, the marriage is over, but his core project is his son. And he will do anything. He's not going to come in early if it means he can't take his kid to school. I may find out from his traits that he's a stable extrovert. But unless I know the core project in his life, I'm not going to be able to accommodate to those things that really matter to him. And it's amazing, Luciana, how much we are not encouraged to share the projects in our lives. So both these things, I think, are really important. Telling each other, chatting about, enjoying, gaining insight about our traits, and also about the core projects in our lives. And you can do that in small groups. It's essential to start with trust and to model it as a trainer or as a coach or a consultant. I hope that's helpful.
It was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luciana.
I remember, Brian, this throws me back years ago when we had our many conversations and when we the group of students, again including Sean and Adam, myself and others, and you talked to us about the importance of mapping out your projects or doing the exercise in general using questionnaires. And what they do for us is raise our levels of awareness.
Yes.
About where we are and what we ought to do. And there is such value to that. So, and, you know, I'm paying it forward today when I talk to my students, again, whether they are master students or the certificate students, questionnaires are important, even if you're not doing research, because they help you raise levels of awareness. So whether you're mapping out your personal projects, whether you are evaluating self-esteem, whether you are identifying your strengths, or any of, there's a great value to just going through the process. Know thyself. Absolutely, it's a vital point. And sometimes when you just list your projects, you may say, "Oh, this is really just a to-do list, isn't it?" And then they say, "Holy Moses, have you noticed how many of my projects concern my wife? Everything concerns her." And I never really realized that. And I guess I would have if I'd reflected, but this has helped me reflect on that. And I think that one of the things about projects, because they're action, they're things that you do that have impact, you can see how your projects impact those of your partner, your work partner, in the case of Luciana, your marital partner, and you know, a practical example, you may find that one of your projects is to keep fit. You want to beat Tal's time in the 1500 meter. All I did was beat you in squash, but I don't know why I put. You all know Tal is a superb squash champion, but so you're keeping fit, and every day after work, your restorative niche is a run like the wind, and you feel good. And at the same time, your spouse and children are at home, and the kids are saying, "I wish Dad would just spend a little bit of time with me before he goes running, because I've just come home from school. There are things I want to tell him about, and he's gone for an hour, and then I've forgotten what I want to tell him." So all that requires in managing your projects is that you take 10 minutes and hug your kid and say, "What happened at school today?" And then go for a run. It's not a big deal. It's a small nudge, but boy, it can be important. What a difference it can make. Yeah. Great. Thank you. So, Leanne, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. I can't connect my camera. My apologies. Okay. And the dog, the foster dog that I have might bark. My apologies for that too. It's called life. So, this thought occurred in my mind when you at the beginning of the webinar, when you talked about well-being in the sense of flourishing and started talking about the personalities, and it occurred to me that flourishing happens when you overcome. That's what flourishing means. Flourishing means that you overcome any challenge in life. That will make you flourish, because what is holding you back from flourishing is what is challenging you. So no matter what your personality would be, if you have that ability to face challenges and overcome resilience, call it whatever you want. I don't know. It's just kind of like a very fresh thought that came up when you were talking. So regardless of the personality, if your personality can handle those traits of overcoming the challenges, that will create flourishment in life. Am I making sense here?
You are making sense. And it's funny that one thing I haven't mentioned yet, and this is a perfect segue to it, is that in a nutshell, for me, human flourishing is the sustainable pursuit of core projects in our lives. And sustainable means that we need to have internal sustainability and external sustainability. So internal sustainability would mean that you are able to meet those challenges in order to flourish, which is exactly what you're saying. And that this means that you can find yourself engaged in projects that are sustainable because you constantly renew your enthusiasm for them. They don't go stale. That's an internal sustainability. But you can have all of the internal sustainability factors in place, and yet you're still unable to flourish because the external conditions are saying, I'm not going to let you do that. Don't even think of going to school. Not in this country. There are all sorts of external constraints upon our core project pursuit. They're challenges. And to meet them, we need more than just internal sustainability. We have to have group action that enables us to meet those challenges external to ourselves, to clear those paths, to create conditions for all of us in which we're able to pursue things that matter dearly to us. So thank you for that question. It's a very interesting one. It ties in nicely to our core precept in our work.
Thank you. Wow.
We unfortunately only have time for one final question. So, Faisal, over
Hi.
to you.
How are you?
Hi,
Thank you
Faisal.
for. Hi. Good night. It's midnight in Turkey, so I try to get it off. I want to ask you that I'm working with athletes, ultramarathoners, and I'm also an ultramarathoner. So we run a lot for great miles. 3 days ago, I ran for 66 kilometers, little above 40 miles. So we generally flourish by floundering, because after several miles, the body stops. We just run mentally. So when I'm making a brand new training for my class on the next couple of months, so I try to get each of them. I know it's not possible, but is there a fine line? Because there are introverts, extroverts, omniverts, every kind of people will be there. And I know I'm working on a thin line, but I'm an extrovert. I have ADHD. So I try to control it by running or something else. I don't want to go all the way to the extrovert side and give examples by them, but how can I keep it simple? How can I reach all the personalities? Is there a thing for that?
Fascinating question.
Thank
Midnight in Turkey. It sounds like a jazz album.
It's
that is a fascinating question. I think the fact that you acknowledge that you need to adopt a different way of challenging them depending upon their own personality, that's the first massive step, because not many coaches or trainers are able to do that. They don't have the self-insight, and that's great as a start. One thing that I found is that you could simply encourage them to adopt the kind of style that works for you. But if you can identify people who are more like them, let's say a more introverted, anxious runner, or one that has a personality profile that differs from yours. If you could find another ultra runner, marathon runner, who does very well, and get him or her to explain to this other person who's similar what their strategy is, that is more likely to be effective than simply giving what has worked for you. And so this is where matching individuals and knowing their personalities can be really helpful in peers helping peers. And sometimes, you know, if you have somebody who's like you in personality, you've shared that you're very similar, you didn't know it at the beginning of the training session, but now you do. And he's very, very good at something you're not good at, but he's not like you are. He's not a middle distance ADHD extroverted whiz. Then it's very likely that he will learn more from that person than from you. And the skill that you have is knowing that you can bring those two together to co-teach each other.
Yeah. You give me a great way to work with this. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Have a good night there.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've come to the end of our time, unfortunately. As always, this was a flow experience.
Oh.
And again, it takes me back to the many hours that we spent into the night often.
Yes.
Talking about personality, psychology, positive psychology, and even self-esteem sometimes. I'd like to end, Brian, just reminiscing a little bit.
Sure.
When you taught your class, one of the techniques that I learned from you during that second year when I took the class in order to learn how to teach was that you would often invoke other people, and you would say, up there, sits
George
Gordon,
Kelly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or Gordon Elport, or whomever you brought to the class, one of the legendary personality psychologists, your teachers. And I often do that, bringing you into the class right
My goodness.
there. Yes, I hope you're not afraid of heights, because it's pretty high.
Oh, that's so touching, Tal. Thank you.
And again, my students know so many stories about you, including the story that during one of your classes, as the TA, I was sitting always in the front row, and suddenly behind me, I hear a thump. And one of the students actually fell off his seat, not because he fell asleep, but because he was laughing so hard. But the story that every one of my students, many of those on this call know of you, is that when you would see us, you would always ask the following. You would say, Tal, how are you really?
Really,
and
yeah.
That really makes all the difference, and that meant so much for all of us, all of your students, and still does, and we pay it or serve it forward. So thank you. And how am I really? I'm honored. I'm delighted. I'm so grateful for your time. So thank you so much for doing all that you're doing and for being here.
Thank you. That's very, very touching, really.
And thank you all for being here. And as always, take good care of yourselves and others. Bye-bye.